Here we go. Hi, everyone. Welcome to our webinar today, Bridging the Gap. Really excited for you all to be here. And I'd love to just start with maybe in the chat, you could drop where you're calling in from and what you're most looking forward to learning about today.
Great idea, Bobby. Now, if I only knew how to get to the chat, I know how to. Oh, there it is.
Cool. Alberta, fantastic. Early for you, Tony. A little early. 9. Hi, Canada. So I assume you're coming from outside Canada, so right? Fantastic, Thomas.
Oh, sorry.
That was supposed to be your cue to sing Rhinestone Cowboy, Pete.
Who was? Oh, it was. Who was the
Robert.
rhinestone? Robert. Yeah. All right. Yes. Thanks, Jen. Bobby, should we get her going?
Yes, I think we're good to go.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Welcome, everybody. It's great to be here today to have this conversation around bridging the gap, an intentional approach to fostering social connection amongst undergraduate students. My name is Pete Bombaci, and I am the founder and CEO of the GenWell Project, Canada's human connection movement. And we've been around since 2016, trying to educate, empower, and catalyze Canadians around the importance of face-to-face social connection for their health, their happiness, their longevity, and for the betterment of society. The student population is part of the work that we do at GenWell, and it's not something that we started off focusing on, but the call and the demand from leaders, from young people, and from those who lead young people has been very loud and very clear that this message around the power of human connection is something that we all need to be leaning into right now, especially post pandemic, as we all awaken to what pulling each other apart from each other for 2 years, and the continued disconnection of society, even on the other side of the global pandemic. So this webinar was really built as a follow up to a campaign that we run every year in February called Face to Face February. That campaign challenges students, and I'm going to say, classrooms rather than campuses moving forward, because a lot of the feedback we got this year is that this is something that's needed in high schools and throughout the lives of students from younger ages through to universities and college campuses. But Face to Face February is a month when we challenge students each and every day to take one action to improve their social health and social well-being, which has a positive impact on their mental and physical well-being. We've been running that campaign for 4 years. It was a program built by students for students. And really, what we did on top of Face to Face February is we had a program called Heads Up. And what we're here to talk about today is that program that we've been running in campuses for roughly about 4 years, but working with some incredible people that I'll introduce to you momentarily. It's really about taking our Heads Up campaign, which is really about being more conscious and intentional about the importance of our social health, but also recognizing the need to get out of our phones and lift our heads more literally to be conscious and intentional about that social well-being. Um, uh, as we come out of the global pandemic, you've probably read in the news recently, the Ontario school boards have now sued many of the social platforms. I know in states in the US, there's lots of conversation around digital technology. A big part of the conversation around digital technology is getting people to put the phone down. But I think a big part of the conversation is also telling them what next. And that's really what we're here to talk about today. Joining me today as part of this webinar are two people who've been an important part of the GenWell team over the course of the last few years. First off, we have Dr. Steve Joordens, who's a professor of psychology at the University of Toronto and director of the Advanced Learning Technologies Lab, whose goal is in the lab to create and assess educational technologies that have research-proven effects while also being easy to use. I think you'll get a little bit more about what Steve is all about, both from an authenticity standpoint, because he's one of those professors that we would all enjoy having share his knowledge with us, but also his passion for helping young people live happier and healthier lives. As well, we've got Adam Frost here. Adam's a postdoctoral researcher at the University of Toronto and who is currently focused on helping build out an aspect of the Heads Up campaign, which we'll dive into far deeper as we move forward. Steve, Adam, great to have you here today, and thank you for making time to be part of this webinar.
Yeah. Thank you. Great to be here, Pete.
So, Steve, as a first-year sociology professor at the University of Toronto, whose first-year class, I think, numbers 1,800 students, are the kids all right? On the other side of the global pandemic and with everything that's going on in the world today, what are you seeing in your classes?
Yeah, so it's intro psychology, just to be technically correct, and yeah, I mean, we have seen, even pre-pandemic, this sort of erosion of social skills to the point where students can be together and yet they're all staring on their phone and not talking to one another, and they seem to have great difficulties doing that. And so we conducted a bit of research last year, and we found just to see what social anxiety levels were at for our students. And we found they were, on average, the average incoming student had a social anxiety level that was right at the clinical cutoff, where a therapeutic person might actually, suggest some form of intervention. So they're basically, these levels of social anxiety are really high, and they have a really difficult time connecting with each other naturally, which is why I'm arguing that this is a time that we in the university systems have to get intentional and really have to bring social connection to our students and help them to get there.
Well, thank you, Steve. I think when you see it each and every day, it's certainly powerful to hear what it is. We do have a few slides here. I'm going to flip them on as I'm asking this next question to Adam. And we'll also have time for questions. So if people want to throw them into the chat, we'll get to the questions later on. But Adam, over the last, I think it's probably been a year now that you've kind of been leading in on this conversation and topic. You've been looking at a lot of the research on both the challenges and the interventions that we can be bringing to students. And I'll flip to the first page, but maybe you can tell us a little bit about what you've seen as you've been researching, how the kids are doing, and what's the research telling us about their health and well-being.
Yeah, thanks, Pete. The data say that it's not a great time to be a kid, and the data also say that it's never a great time to be a kid. Kids struggle generally. It's a tough time to be alive. When you're around 20, your anxiety is generally higher than at any other point it will be at your life. So generally, it's difficult to be a youth, but especially during the last 15 years, 20 years, things have not been going well. Things are going in the wrong direction. So as you can see on these slides, this is, some of you might have heard of Twenge and Haidt. They've been doing a lot of research in this area about how kids are doing socially. They did a bunch of research where we have some nice longitudinal measures from many institutions where youth are being educated across the United States. And they find pretty consistently that beginning around about 2010, things start getting worse for youth. They go out less. As you see in this figure 4 here, there's this downward trend of youth are just staying home more. And then coincidentally, you see in figure 5 that around that same time, you see spikes in the amount of loneliness that people are experiencing. These are, as you can see, kind of K-12 students represented here. And so it's generally rough to be a youth. Actually, if we could skip to the next slide, it speaks to that. There we go. So this is some recent data from the Canadian Social Connection survey that's run by Kiffer Card in collaboration with the GenWell Project. And so these are data from 2021, 2022, and 2023, looking across Canada, across demographics. This question is, how are people doing in terms of social anxiety? So this on the y-axis here, we have a measure of social anxiety, the social interaction anxiety scale. And then we have age plotted on the x-axis. And we go from 16 years of age up to 90. We have like a really nice range of demographics represented here. And this, to me, I work with data a lot. I never see a linear relationship this strong. This is incredible. It's just a straight, like if you go from old to young, it's a straight increase in anxiety. These orange points represent the average level of social anxiety for that age. And you can see the youth are anxious. And this is replicated elsewhere. This is replicated in Steve's data, where again, this is the clinical cutoff around here for where you might want to visit a mental health professional and check in to see if you do need specific interventions, because you might be entering a state of crisis. So this is the average person. The average youth is like bordering on a state of crisis, which is really bad. And you can see that tends to get better kind of just by getting older and giving less poops, I guess you might say. And so yeah, it's tough. It's tough out there for the youth. And I think we probably need to do something.
Yeah, I think we're all aligned that we might. Did you want to speak to this one as well, Adam?
Oh yeah, so I can give my thoughts about what might be causing this. I'll just quickly rattle off some things. It looks like this is a standardized testing score, ACT scores in the United States. And you see, especially since the pandemic, things are getting rough. But even pre-pandemic, the trend is not upwards. So, you know, the pandemic made everything way worse in these areas. But even before the pandemic, things were not looking great. And that seems like it could be creeping into education outcomes as well. And what I think that there's, again, the Jonathan Haidt has been making a lot of rounds lately saying that that social media is contributing to social anxiety and loneliness. And I think there's probably some truth to that. The data do seem to say there's a relationship there. However, social anxiety, loneliness, they are big problems. And social media represents a part of the explanation for why that might be happening. I think that it's bigger than social media. I think it's a culture probably of social comparison where we are all evaluating each other. We're all not speaking face to face. We're just chatting on phones, editing our responses 10 times before we send it out to the person we like. So I think that what the situation boils down to, people are living in a lot of fear, fear of missing out, fear of not measuring up. They're not rich enough, they're not beautiful enough, they're not popular enough compared to all their friends that they're seeing on Instagram, living their best lives. Fear of being ostracized, fear of the future because career prospects also look bleak. And then there's anxiety. I think anxiety it seems to be a really big problem, and social anxiety especially, because people, you need to exercise your social skills or they atrophy. They're the kind of thing that gets better with experience. And if they atrophy, if you never have that experience, it's really tough to climb out of that hole without any kind of help. So there's fear and anxiety that You're not used to speaking in real time, so you might make a mistake. People might not like you. If I look bad, it's all over. It's the end of the world. There's no recovering from a mistake, is how that might feel. And then, worst of all, the nail in the coffin, literally sometimes, unfortunately, suicide rates are also increasing amongst youth, is helplessness. If things get to the point where you don't see a better future for yourself, that is a tough spot to be in. So youth might feel that it's bad and it's only getting worse. I can't practice social skills because it's going to go badly and I'm going to feel bad and I'm going to burn bridges. And then everyone is moving ahead, everyone is doing great, but I'm here, I'm getting worse. Doors are closing as I'm getting older. What can I do? And unfortunately, the answer to that is really sad sometimes. So yeah, not looking great, unfortunately, for the situation of the youth.
Thank you for that. It's a terrible story. Funny enough, I just started reading The Anxious Generation by Jonathan Haidt, so I'm thrilled to hear that you're using that research. I did even in the first chapter, he talks about students feel fear, young people fear social death more than they fear death itself. And I think this is the wake up call. I agree that it's not just social media. I just think it put the challenges on steroids over the last, decade or so as we all wake up to it. And certainly Steve Joordens has educated me on the fear of negative evaluation as one of the things we all need to be aware of when we think of young people, but frankly, not just young people, but all of us. So let me. I'm gonna jump in here for a second before I pass it back over to Steve. So as I mentioned earlier on, the GenWell Project 4 years ago launched a Heads Up campaign, and that is about the literal and figurative approaches to getting young people to lift their heads out of their phone and be more conscious and intentional around the importance of their social well-being. In everything we do at the GenWell Project, Canada's Human Connection Movement, we do three things. We educate, we empower, and we catalyze, because until people understand what it is we're asking them to do and why, then there's little likelihood of them taking action. Really, what's happened over the course of the last year or two, Dr. Steve Joordens, along with Adam's support, have recognized that there may be some opportunities for us to actually build on the program that we've currently been running in campuses across this country. And that's what we're really going to walk through now. So, from the education standpoint, a lot of the work we do is going into campuses and running programs where we get the opportunity to speak to classes, to groups, or to an entire campus and share the importance of social connection, looking back at the history, showing the negatives and the positives, and then showing the ways in which people can take action each and every day in their lives, whether it's talking to strangers, neighbors, friends, family, classmates, so many ways in which we can do it. But a big part of it is really about giving people permission to do something when they know the facts around it. Empowerment comes through those tips, tools, and ideas. And then catalyzing are things like face-to-face February and recognizing the situations that are around us each day where we can start building stronger social connection bonds. The original aspect of the Heads Up campaign came with on-campus tools, came with social media tools, so that campuses could raise the collective consciousness around the importance of this subject, so that every student can recognize that they are not only part of the challenge, but they are also part of the solution. We had tools like toques and hats that would help people recognize others and give them permission to have those conversations. I used to run the Movember campaign here in Canada, and that mustache was a very powerful tool that gave people permission to speak to each other. And that's what these tools were intended to do, to keep people top of mind, keep the conversation around social connection and social health top of mind for people. So over the course of the last year, Dr. Steve Joordens has really picked up on this issue within the student population and has really taken the Heads Up campaign and built on it with some really important tools and understanding that only somebody that's been an intro psych professor for 30 years could probably bring to the conversation. So, Steve, I want to pass it back to you to really talk about how you're taking Heads Up and adding on some key elements that can really help students, to Adam's point, practice human interaction before they have to go out and work with that fear of negative evaluation. And surprisingly, after 3 years, you're still on mute.
Yeah. Okay.
We're
All
getting
right.
there. We're getting
All
there.
right. Okay. Cool. So there's really two aspects of this that I think are really important for us to help students with. So the first thing is Pete didn't go through all the stats, but if you look at the science of social connection, you will see it is probably one of the most powerful variables out there. It is what we now say social health seems to be the foundation for physical health and mental health. If you have your social health in place, then the physical and mental health tend to be much more easier to get into place. But we don't really understand that. So the power of social connection is very deep. It really connects with the primitive parts of our brain. And a lot of people don't really understand how important it is. And so part of what we need to do with students is to instill in them that appreciation for the importance of social connection. It is the number one predictor of happiness, for example. And so for students to kind of understand how important it is one thing. But then the second thing is what we're alluding to here. It's one thing to have somebody come into a classroom and convince you that what your life needs is more social connection. It's another thing to do it. And especially for a generation with the level of social anxiety we've been talking about, with potentially, it's not, as Adam was talking about, atrophied social skills. It's not even clear these students have developed the social skills, certainly in the same way that we would have, because they live in a much more distracted world with shallower communication all the time. And so they may not have had the real experience interacting in real time with other human beings to build their competency to the first place. And that's probably why they feel so much fear. They can tell, I don't really know how to behave well in a conversation. So now, even if they know I should be more socially connected, it's hard for them to activate that knowledge and turn it into a new way of being. And so that's the challenge, I think, if universities are now going to look at our students and say, okay, we want to help them with this process, we feel we need to, then those are those two things we're trying to hit. And we're going to try to do it. So what we've ultimately done is try to come up with some other tools. And part of the idea of this webinar is to start also connecting with other colleagues on other institutions, because what we would like to do is to create a set of tools that we could share across our campuses to welcome our students better and to really try to enculture them into this social connection kind of spirit. So yeah, go ahead, Pete, with the next one. So we're imagining sort of 3 steps. Oh, and this one is not hyperlinked anymore, is it not? Okay. It may
Sorry
not
about that.
There should be a real video in there. You should be able to, I think, click on it
Try clicking.
or double click.
You know what I might do is you keep talking, Steve, and I will go find it.
It'll be on the Canva version of this.
Okay.
Okay. So what this is you're going to hear a little bit about this technology called Peer Scholar, and it's something that we've created out of our lab, and a lot of universities use it, but we use it and repurpose it in a few ways here. And everything that we're talking about here, we're going to make completely shareable at no cost. So even though there is this ed tech underlying things, that's not part of what this is about. But it turns out that we had a good friend and colleague, Dr. Pamela Toulouse, who is a First Nations educator. She's a 3M National Technology Award winner. So she's very well regarded in the education space, and she used Peer Scholar in her class. And at one point we reached out to her and we said, hey, is there any way we can sort of be a positive force in this truth and reconciliation kind of context? And she said, hey, there's actually a way we build community in the Indigenous communities that would be really interesting. So let's just try playing this, Pete. I think this is a shortened version that Adam has created, so it'll give the taste of the idea.
Awesome. And I think the sound's on. Give me the thumbs up when I get her going here, just so that we all...
Okay.
Ani and hello. I'm Dr. Pamela Rose Toulouse, and I am from Sagamok First Nation in Northern Ontario. I am a proud Anishinaabe woman. I have been working in education for 29 plus years and have published over 55 resources ranging from books to curriculum to webinars. The activity you are just about to be engaged in includes several steps that reflect aspects of Indigenous ways of knowing, doing, and thinking. This activity respectfully includes the teachings of the sacred circle. This is where we honor the physical, emotional, intellectual, and spiritual parts of ourselves and of each other. Situating ourselves and telling our stories about who we are is critical to Indigenous relationships. This is why in this create phase, you will share your story through text, video, poetry, songs, images, and other respectful tools that represent you. This begins the physical aspect of the sacred circle. In the assess phase, you're going to be asked to read, view, and or listen to the stories of 5 or 6 of your amazing peers. The sacred circle call on us to honor each other in a good and humble way. This is about the emotional, intellectual, and spiritual coming together. You are encouraged to engage with your peers by letting them know these things. A, what you appreciate about them. B, what you can relate to. And C, what you still have questions about related to them. To share like this is about building a respectful community of learners, teachers, and human beings. Reflection. This is all about each of us taking the time to review our peers' responses about us. You take their wonderful words about you and creatively pull them together. You then select one peer from your wonderful group to further engage with, thus embracing and emulating a sacred circle approach. Integrating the physical, emotional, intellectual, and spiritual aspects of self is critical to Indigenous pedagogy. These activities are those good reminders to lift each other up and honor our gifts that we bring to these learning spaces. Miigwech, and thank you.
All right, so the idea here is it's really twofold, right? One of them is to bring in some of those Indigenous ways of knowing and being into the classroom and to share those with our students as part of what we would like to do for the Truth and Reconciliation process. But the other part is all about social connection. And specifically, you know, if you think about how, yeah, we'll go back a slide for now, Pete, just not to have that there. If you think about for now, you know, how we normally greet our classes when they come in, it's usually pretty cold, right? They sit down and we start doing our prof thing and going through our syllabus and blah, 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 blah. The idea here is no, meet as human beings first before you get into the class thing. And the idea of students sharing their stories with one another. And by the way, the professor optimally engages in this process with the students as well. So sharing stories, reacting respectfully to one another's stories, this is a way of welcoming people into a community. And, you know, the real hope is by the end of this process, they also are able to make a friend or two through the process. And we know from data that incoming students, at least at UT Scarborough, tend to have no fellow students they're coming with. They tend to be, you know, they're alone. So they're entering the student with no problem, Jeanette. They're coming into the classroom with no friends. And so if we can help them get a friend in the first week of classes, and that's the idea, you do this in the first week, then we're helping them a little bit with that social connection right off the bat. Okay, so that's step one. We're going to go a little quick through these ones to give you a sense. But then the idea is, you know, if there's things that you find interesting and want to keep in touch with us about it, we're going to encourage you to reach out. So let's do step two. So step one would have been, again, the first, almost the very beginning of class. We do that Indigenous welcome. But now let's cut to the real heart of the matter, which is the social anxiety, and the need to do these two things that I talked about. So we're literally imagining now having two aspects. One is a Coursera course that really teaches them all of the details about social connection. So this is more knowledge based, but it really shows just how important social connection is, across a variety of contexts and relative to a whole bunch of different factors. So this would be a course made available to anybody, just out there in the Coursera world, and it would be linked to what you're seeing alluded to on the right, Talk Lab, with the basic message that says, okay, this course will tell you about the importance of social connection, but if you actually want to work on your skills, now that you know how important it is, if you want to develop your skills, that's what Talk Lab is all about. So where you can learn and practice specific skills. Now, it's the practice that's the tricky part, right? And that's what we want you to zone in on. Imagine we taught a student some skill. And again, just for context, we'll use our favorite one, which is active listening. So you could teach a student, when you're in a conversation, if you come prepared with some questions to ask the person you're talking with, and then if you're get good at following up those questions by asking for more details, listening really carefully, finding more questions you can ask along the way, kind of like a reporter does, right? When you see a reporter talking to somebody, that you can use that approach to keep a conversation going, and it tends to be very positive because the other person always loves talking about themselves. So if you're asking them about themselves, that tends to be a very safe thing to do, and it works out fine. Okay, so we could tell students about active listening. We could give them a whole bunch of tips and strategies. We could show them some examples. Now they have the knowledge of that strategy. But in order for them to really get the skill, they need to put that knowledge to work. They need to practice. And of course, the problem is we can't just ask them to practice with another human being. Well, we can, but it will be very difficult for them because of all that social anxiety. As soon as you put another human being in front of them, they're going to have all this anxiety, and that's going to make it very hard for them to practice effectively. And so the notion of Talk Lab is, can we make the practice safer? And we can go ahead there, Pete.
All right, if this didn't click on me there.
Yep. So here's the idea, and I really want to, actually, I have this vivid memory of being at Pete's Human Connection conference and Adam kind of pulling me aside into a side room and saying, hey, I got this idea about how we could use AI. And so this is really Adam's idea. I want to be crystal clear about that. But the idea is just this: rather than asking them to talk to a human being, we get them to talk to a bot created with with any generative AI kind of approach. So again, we would start by giving them some strategy. So like active listening, but now we would say, okay, now talk to this bot, and do your active listening. And we were going to try to make it as fun and cool as possible. So to give you an example of how we might gamify and make it fun, one idea we have for active listening is to create bots that simulate different famous people. So I'll use my usual example, the Taylor Swift bot. So we create a Taylor Swift bot, and that bot will answer every question as they believe Taylor Swift would answer the question. And so now imagine you create a bunch of these bots that are all famous people the students should know. Now they can go into a little game, we can call it, where they start interacting with a bot, and their goal is to figure out who they're talking to. And how quickly can they figure out who they're talking to? And so how are they going to do that? Well, they're going to have to ask probing questions. They're going to have to follow up, and they're going to have to use active listening. And if they use those active listening skills, they can very quickly, hopefully, hone in on who this person is. And we could gamify, we could give them points if they can figure it out quicker, etc. Leaderboards, all the fun things you can do with gamification. The critical thing here is, next slide, Pete, sorry, is why the bots? And I've already alluded to this, but it's really powerful if you really think of what's standing away in the practice is the fear of negative evaluation. Students worry that because they lack competency, the conversations will not go well, and that will reflect really badly on them. Because why? Well, because that conversation partner may, first of all, not like them. Secondly, may speak behind their back about how weird they are or whatever, all this social threat that's there. But that social threat disappears when it's a robot. Um, there is no fear of negative evaluation. Who cares what a robot thinks of us? It will not talk behind our back. And so it becomes a very safe context. By the way, it's also very non-emotional in its responses, which is an interesting thing we could talk about. Adam and I are having some fun injecting emotionality in a little bit, but it's a very safe, comfortable place. And if we gamify it well, we could really hopefully create a situation where they get practice with all these strategies and they get very comfortable and natural using them when talking to bots. And then, of course, we need to scaffold things up. We need to move them from the bots to humans, which you can almost swap out directly. You can say you can have the same sort of interaction, but instead of having a LLM on the other side, we're going to give you another human on the other side. So now practice these same things human to human. And then we can bring in video, and then we can actually ultimately bring them to face-to-face kind of context, which is where we want to go. If we can get them comfortable in those face-to-face contexts, then they're ready to enjoy the benefits of social connection. So this middle part then is really about directly confronting that social anxiety and giving students a platform where they can develop, learn all these skills of social connection, practice them in a safe environment, and then ultimately try to transfer them to the learning environment. So that's step 3. A whole lot to unpack there. But let me give you, so that was step 2. Let me give you step 3. And these are the 3 things we're thinking about. Step 3, and this is something I think a lot of universities might be interested in. You can almost think of these as independent bits, right? Like maybe some people love that Indigenous welcome and say, yeah, I want to use that in my class. Cool. Hopefully the platform will be something that we make available to everybody who wants to develop their social skills. The third one is an experiential learning opportunity. And it's something that I've done in my class to bring experiential learning to scale. So as Pete suggested, I have 1,800 students roughly in my intro psych class. But I do this kind of thing with them every year, or have at least for the last 6 or 7. I put them in teams of 4. And each team is now supposed to simulate a marketing company. And they've been hired by an external partner. In this case, it will be GenWell. And so they get we create a full package. And if any universities want to be part of this, they would have access to that package. And that package will include an interview with me and Pete, talking about the GenWell mission, and then ultimately introducing this challenge to them. I'll give you a little bit more on the challenge. Well, okay, let me just say it now. The challenge would be basically Pete saying, hey, I would like your marketing firm to identify some target market that could benefit from this social connection message, and then to create a public service announcement, taking everything you've learned in psychology to try to bring the message to that market. And so they create the PSA, and you see this in the middle part. They create the PSA. They also create a justification document that just shows their thinking while they were creating the PSA, allows us to understand, what they were trying to do and how they were trying to do it. So they submit that. So now in my class, I have like 450 of these. But they then go into, and this is again using Peer Scholar, but again, we're going to make this all available at no charge for anyone who wants to use it. But they go into a round of peer assessment where they assess other teams. And the way things work, the magic is each team ends up being assessed by 24 students. They're all applying a rubric that has a quantitative basis underlying it. So based on the ratings, we can now find the top 10 PSAs based on the student ratings. And then those top 10 PSAs in the third step go on to GenWell. And then Pete and others at GenWell will ultimately pick the top 3. And those top 3 end up featured by GenWell on a website or something, and potentially become part of the materials that are being used. And obviously there have to be discussions with students around that. And the members of the team get a certificate of thanks. They also get a reference letter if they make the top 10. They get a reference letter from me. But the idea here is we want to make this a challenge that's available to all universities, where we kind of give you the package of everything you need. And then you can be doing this in your class. And we might need an individual at each university, especially with this, to establish the top 10 and to interact with GenWell over those top 10 things. But the idea is to make this available as well. Now, what's this about? If you consider the grand package of these things, what we're really trying to do is help students make initial social connection with the Indigenous welcome, but then through the stuff in the middle to really inform them about the importance of social connection and give them that safe practice. And in this last step, we're really asking them to dig deep into the social connection and basically repackage that message and present it to others, which again should really marinate them in the importance of social connection. And so the notion is, in this one term in the course, they hit those three things as they go through. And by the end of that first term of study, we have hopefully given them the ability to really understand the importance of social connection and to mobilize that, to actually start using it to connect with their community. Okay, that was a lot, but those are the three steps.
All right. Well, thank you, Steve. I think it's you did a great job of summarizing what you, Adam, and I have been talking about for, I don't know, about a year now. To put that into a few slides is not an easy thing to do. I'd love to open the floor to everybody. Obviously, this is a very big subject right now. It's in the news. Obviously, Adam stated some stats there that are not always the most beautiful stats. And I think we're all seeking solutions right now to help our students, not only get through their student life better, but also get through life better. And frankly, I think this is part of that solution. And then building to the bigger GenWell movement, which is really just saying we all need to be part of the solution to building the more connected Canada where people can thrive. So if anybody has any questions about any aspect of the program that Steve outlined around GenWell or Heads Up or the AI, throw it into the chat there and we can answer them. And if there's not any questions specifically from the audience, I can certainly just pass it around to Steve and Adam for some last comments before we wrap up today. But a huge thank you to everybody for joining us for the conversation today. It is an important one, and I'm glad so many of you were able to join us. I'll wait for how soon might GenWell Challenge make it into curriculum?
So GenWell Challenge, I mean, if someone was feeling hungry on the GenWell Challenge thing, the soonest I would be comfortable working with somebody would be the fall term. And so the GenWell Challenge tends to happen more around November. Like it tends to happen more sort of week 9 of a 12-week course. It's a capstone kind of experience. But it would actually be kind of fun for me to have 1 or 2 other classes that I'm working with, because my challenge is I've done this in my class many times. My challenge with the GenWell Challenge is going to be how to scale this up administratively and to have an idea of what that challenge is, to be honest. So to work with 1 or 2 others and to kind of do that together would probably help. So the GenWell Challenge, I would say as early as this fall, but more generally, to give you a sense of our timeline on these things, the notion is that we are bringing them into place in the fall, and certainly the talk lab is going to be something that continues to develop. So something will be in place in the fall, and it's going to continue to build as we go. So probably by next spring is when I expect it'll be really a powerful kind of platform. So in the meantime, we are sort of beta testing in my large class, and also collecting some research as we do, so that we can provide some evidence base of some of these things, and at least try to optimize efficacy and stuff like that. So that's our kind of time frame. Is we're imagining working mostly ourselves in the fall, but then really trying to connect with other colleagues, and that's what this webinar is the beginning of that outreach process. So anyone that's interested in any of these components, please feel free to reach out, and yeah, we'll stay in touch then as things progress.
Yeah, great question, Tony. And the other component I'll say is that Bobby Breckenridge, who's kind of leading this webinar, is also conducting the in-class or in on-campus education component, even until we get the AI piece in place. So if anybody has a need or a desire to get their students up to speed on that information, Bobby, who's joining us here, is ready to activate that. Bobby, where can people get hold of you? Is that through the website now at genwell.ca?
Yep, genwell.ca is always great, and I'll pop my email in the chat as well, for anyone that wants to reach out directly. I also just saw we have a great question. Is Talk Lab for general public access? Would you like to?
So optimally, I mean, it's going to be interesting to see how this rolls out, where the goal is initially colleges and universities, but this is a problem that's much more general. So even I say initially, I don't know how, can I talk about TPL, Pete?
Sure.
Yeah. Okay. I'm not sure how much. So we've had discussions in the background with Toronto Public Library, for instance, who are also interested in this, and they would love to make the program, the platform, available to people who visit the library, and potentially even accompany it with sort of like a reading group, like if you're reading a book together, where they could come together and talk about the platform and their experiences, which would bring a face-to-face component to it. So we really love the idea, and they say what starts in Toronto Public Library goes to the Canadian Public Library system. So I mean, that gives you a sense, I think, of our goal is that we would like to, institutions abroad, I mean, our goal is to make this as generally available as possible. And I think if I gave the 100% honest answer to this, there's going to be costs to doing all this. And our goal with GenWell is to find philanthropists and people who are back, and GenWell's done very good, so that we don't have to pass on any charges to anybody. We hope that we'll just be able to cover, but that'll only be, I think, when, scaling global, how does that scale demand? And, how do we just have to navigate that thing to make sure it's a sustainable platform and stuff like that. So a few details like that to work out, but certainly our goal, I mean, Pete starts in Canada. I mean, he always says it's to catalyze and get social connection going all across Canada. And that's our first focus, but obviously this is a global issue. Adam had some data showing how global of an issue it was. I think we pulled that out at one point, but we would like to make this just generally available. This is not a commercial play. This is really trying to impact social connection.
I think there is an opportunity here, Beth, just to stay connected, because if we did a pilot, again, most of the education components can be virtual. Obviously the AI is like virtual. I guess a bot is virtual. The reality is, if we put the information into a MOOC, and we have the AI component there, Beth, ultimately, if we could find some dollars, locally in your market, wherever you're, tuning in from, hey, maybe there's an opportunity to test it there. Because the reality is, Steve's talked to the research on how important social connection is, which none of us have ever formally been educated on. So this is an issue for everyone. And even the World Health Organization they have a landscape review of all the research that has been done on interventions in this area. And all the research that's been done on the interventions is only post-crisis, at best early intervention. So nobody has really led this kind of work before from a prevention standpoint in regards to social connection. And so we're all learning and growing at the same time. We're kind of building the plane and flying it. But at the end of the day, we've got some of the brightest minds in the space working on this project. Some recent conversations with some leaders in the US in positive psychology. And so all this work is going in to create this platform that, frankly, as Steve said, is something we can all benefit from, not just our young people. So I'll throw that in there as well. You're in the UK. Okay, good to know. Thanks for the comment, Serene. And what else did I see? One there that I'm just skipping over. Institutions abroad. No, that's it. So I think that's it for questions. Anybody else in there? I'll assume not. So let me throw it back. Adam, I'll come to you first. And I'll just say, first off, grateful for all the work that you've been doing in trying to do the research. Having listened to a little bit of that book this morning, it's really hard to believe that we've got to this point, certainly with digital technology as a component. But what's your greatest hope coming from Heads Up, as somebody who, I hope you're okay with it, who admittedly is a bit of an introvert, Adam? What's your greatest hope for young people, coming out of building a program like Heads Up with the advent of the addition of AI as part of the solution?
Yeah. For me, I think that if I can do anything, I would like to help address the issue of hopelessness. Because right now there just aren't great solutions. Like, people have tried interventions, they move the needle a little bit, sometimes to the extent that it's statistically significant, but this is just going from bad to a bit less bad a lot of the time. So the truth is we don't really have great solutions for people at the moment, which is tragic and contributes, I think, to the sense of hopelessness because, what are people going to do if the scientists don't know what to do yet? So I think that we need science to put a concerted effort into finding what actually works, like make interventions that don't only shift the needle from bad to slightly less bad, but go into good. And I would like to help lead the charge to develop programs that are demonstrably effective, not only statistically significantly so, but clinically significantly so. And actually, I would like to help people address social issues before they're at the point of, cutting themselves when they might finally approach a mental health expert. I want people to say, I want it to be at the state of like, now, if you want to learn piano, you're like, oh, I'm 30 years old, I want to learn piano. It's not like the world is saying, we don't know how to teach you piano. It's like, no, you can actually go and learn how to play piano. In a few years, you can be better at piano. That is not the situation for social health and social anxiety and so on. And I would love to help at least create the option so that if someone wants to learn to play piano, we can teach them to play piano.
What a beautiful answer, Adam Frost. Steve Joordens, I'm going to finish with you, but I actually am going to throw a curveball at you. And the question I want to throw to you, A, what's your hope with Heads Up? But what's the importance of community? With exercise and eating well, we've empowered people with information for 50 plus years on how you can exercise better and take care and eat better and all those things. And yet we still have an obesity crisis in society. What is the importance of educating the whole campus, the whole workplace, the whole, because the individual, especially when it comes to social health, we know that social health cannot be done by yourself.
Yep.
It requires a society that's open to building connection, who's open to having conversations and recognizing that it's not always about me, but maybe it's about what I can do for somebody else, like Tony Estevez does every day. So, Steve, what component does community play in Heads Up in educating more than one person in this with this information?
Yeah, and that really is the goal, to create a situation. And ultimately, by the way, what we imagine is in the perfect world, especially when the Talk Lab platform exists, when we accept students and when we send out that letter to them and say, hey, you've been accepted in our school, we want to say, by the way, you're going to be coming into a completely new community. Your success within this community, your happiness, the extent to which you thrive depends mostly on your ability to integrate, to be able to get to know others and to be able to feel a sense of belonging with that community. And here's a bunch of skills that can help you do that. So we would like to, before they even come, say, hey, work on these communication skills so that when you land in Frosh Week, you're feeling ready, not just excited, but you actually have some tools in your back pocket that you can use to be successful as you interact with stuff. And then, yes, the hope is that if we're better welcoming them, and that's part of what the Indigenous welcome is about. Hey, campuses, we should be welcoming our new students better. And then if we give them the tools to integrate as they get here, then we have that sense of community. And why is it so important? The community is what we lean into when the times get tough. So all of the research on stress suggests that if you have a number of really good close connections, that when you feel stressed, you kind of share it with them. If you know they care, you can share your situations and your stress dissipates and you're able to kind of handle it. But if you don't have anyone to talk to, then the stress comes on you and it tends to stay on you. And that's when you get this chronic stress reaction happening and that leading to, all of the negative effects. So communities are buffer. When we feel a strong, supportive community, we are ready to face the challenges. And university is challenging for these students. And so I think it's, on us now to make sure that we're doing our part, not only to welcome them to our campus, but to help them connect with one another as they do so. I think it's the most important thing we can do for them at this point.
What a response. Adam, Steve, thank you so much for your time today. Thank you for walking us through the issue and maybe the solution to building more connected campuses where all of our students can thrive and set themselves up for not just student and academic success, but maybe life success. Thank you to everybody for joining us. We are Canada's Human Connection Movement, the GenWell Project, or now GenWell at genwell.ca. I invite everybody to be part of the solution to building the more connected Canada where we all thrive. Thanks very much for your time today. This has been recorded, and we'll put out some snippets and link everybody in a follow-up email to the recording of the webinar. So thanks everybody for participating.